The drunk one.
Okay. All right, and we'll go now. All right, everyone, welcome to the show. Thanks so much. We have Australia being represented. The Victoria, you explain where the heck you're from and how you got here.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Martin. My name's Ben Hurle. I'm the director of Victorian UFO Action, and we are the primary group in Victoria that investigates UFO sightings in our state. We've decided that we'd like to get out there and see the world, I suppose, to a certain extent, and what better way to start than by coming to the International UFO Congress here in Phoenix. So we've decided that we'd do a bit of a road trip, and we landed in Las Vegas, and we've been all through northern Nevada and northern Arizona, and we're now here in Phoenix for the week. And we're really having a great time meeting all these different people that are around the UFO phenomenon, people doing all sorts of different work in the phenomenon, coming at it from different perspectives. And really there's just so many conversations you can have with anyone standing in the corner or talk to a major presenter. It really is a great opportunity.
Now, just while you're speaking, Dunn, how long did whose brainchild, first of all, was this to come over here, and how long did this take to get the whole thing together and planned?
Well, it's really, I think, Jim and Chris that was where the genesis of the idea started. And you think about what it takes to get 6 people to get time off work and have the money and all those type of things to pull it off. So it certainly had been in the pipeline for, well, I'd say well over 6 months or so, for us to all agree that we could go, ask our bosses for time off, etc., etc. So it sort of is really quite special that we're able to get 6 people from our small group, which is practically half the group, to be able to travel to the United States.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here, and I will talk a little bit about it. Australia is actually one of the top listeners to this show. You're a country of 26 million or so people, and you're number 3 usually when I check it. 2, sometimes even 2. So let's start, James, let's start at this end right here, and a little bit about each of you and what got you interested in the subject.
Thanks, Martin. I'm an architect by profession, coming out of the design industry. I kind of came through the aerospace as an enthusiast in that field, largely drawn by the writings and work of Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And one goes, as I say, down the rabbit hole, and I just kept going and made a trip to the US and made another trip to the US and met a few people, and it just keeps going. Basically, early on I came to the conclusion that at its core the phenomena is real, and I became fairly obsessed with finding out what's going on. So that's what got me into it. But of course, once you start it, there's no way out, is there? That's right. As we all know. That's right. But yeah, so to get into the action, you've got to come to the US. Let's face it, that's ground zero for pretty much everything that's going on.
Is that how it's viewed?
Oh, absolutely. Australia's a small country, and really not a lot goes on there in the field. We have the same problems that you have here, and that in terms of the media and the general public, basically the subject is just ridiculed. It is changing, of course, but over here you have an industry, you have a community. You can do these kind of things. And one thing I really believe is you need a tribe. You need to get yourself around like-minded people. And whatever your take on the subject matter is, you can find something in the US that will, that you can plug into, I suppose. So I'd made a few trips over here, and I'd been to this conference and others before. And I think that's what kind of got, just threw the idea out there, and it just kind of got legs, and here we are. So we're having a great time. It's incredible, the people you meet. Just on the way to this interview, we stopped for 5 minutes with James Fox, with Lynn Katai. You know what it's like. Yeah. Paul Hynek, it just goes on. So, for us from the other side of the planet, we just don't get access to these kind of people, this kind of information. And the opportunity, and it's not just the celebrities, it's just the people you meet, just anywhere. Everyone's got a story. Yeah. And it's just incredible. So I think we're all having a really good time, and we're just excited. It's just and like I said before, you never know what's going to happen next. It's just, it's just incredible. So. And
Irene, you'll be next, but I just want to say one thing that kind of astounded me when I started to look into this is how many highly intelligent people are interested in the topic. And because on the outside, growing up with the ridicule and stuff like that, you hear it's just these kooks and farmers and whatever, and those are the only people that's kind of like the the misconception of who's actually interested in it.
Absolutely. And, outsiders looking in thinks we're all crazy and all this, but you talk to people like the Danny Sheehan's and the James Foxes and the Richard Dolans and yourself, your reputation is incredible, you can attack this subject matter very credibly and very intelligently. And that's what I think as a group we're all very sceptical. We all like to think we attack this very, very intelligently. But you're right. I mean, and it is changing before our eyes. The subject matter is unfolding before our eyes. People are starting to take this seriously. Yep. The news media are starting to take this seriously.
That's right.
So it's incredible times we're going through.
Yep. Okay. Irene?
Oh, hi. I come from a very sceptical and debunking background, and my belief was that anybody who saw a UFO was on some sort of mind-altering drug and not right in the head until I moved from South Australia to Melbourne, and through a series of events through my workplace was presented with the Westall case. I'd never heard of a mass sighting, and to me, I stood up and took that quite seriously, that there was such a thing. There was a serious researcher, Shane Ryan, that was involved in looking into the case. He and Rosie Jones had made a documentary on it and interviewed the witnesses who saw the case, and I guess anybody watching this can just go and Google Westall if they haven't already. Prior to that, just out of curiosity, I had wondered if there were anybody seriously researching UFOs. And after doing a lot of digging on the internet, I discovered Keith Basterfield, and he's from my home state of South Australia. And I was amazed to see his methodical and thorough research and compiling of cases for many years. One of the cases I noticed was in the next street from where I grew up, back in the 60s, early 70s, I think it was. I can't quite remember the year, and that really sent a chill down my spine. And then, I left that alone, and then once again came across through my work about the Westall incident. And when the 50th anniversary came up, I thought it would be nice to have a little picnic and meet the witnesses. So I put a notice out on Facebook and invited anybody to come and have a moment silent, sort of remembering the incident, April 6, 1966. And we met at the Grange, and I had the pleasure of meeting some of the witnesses. One case in particular that impressed me was the case of Paul Smith, who wasn't a school child at the time. He was a market gardener working, and he saw the craft quite close up, and he and his boss looked up from pulling up carrots, and you'll probably see this on the video as well, but he explained to me how the craft was hovering there in front of him, and he wasn't sure whether it was a trick or an illusion or some sort of projection. And he and the boss were staring at this thing, and it changed colours, and it became semi-transparent, and it drifted through the trees. And I actually went to the very spot with him, and he explained to me and showed me where it was. And he said, and I said, well, what do you mean it drifted through the trees? Did it go in and around the trees at the Grange? And he said, no, it drifted through the trees. And I said, what do you mean, like a ghost or like smoke? And he said, yes, it became the consistency of smoke. And I thought, I've never heard of anything like this. And this prompted me to keep looking into this phenomena. I've discovered Jacques Vallée. I've been reading all of his diaries. I've really tried to focus on the scientific aspect of this phenomena. And that's it, pretty much.
Excellent. Ben, I know you were on the show, my show, in 2017. But go ahead for the person who's never heard your story, and just quickly go into what got you interested in it in the beginning.
Yeah, well, going into the beginning, I was into UFOs as a child. The first books I bought were books on UFOs, and I was familiar with the Travis Walton case and Betty and Barney Hill, cases of that stature right back in the 1970s, not long after the Walton incident. And it really captured my imagination as a child that the possibility of there being other intelligences out there that would be visiting us for whatever reason. And to me it seemed quite a natural thing. Even at a young age it just seemed very intuitive that it was actually a fact, that there really is no question to it. So that was my own personal belief. But it wasn't, and I had the interest all through my life, so I'd always read UFO books and stuff like that. But it'd drift in and out, with life, busy. And then when I turned about 40, I thought I really want to get back into UFOs, and I thought I want to investigate UFOs. I want to get out there and I want to actually be a part of something that's actively exploring this. And I live 3 hours from Melbourne, so I don't live anywhere near the city. And unfortunately in Australia, really at that time, there wasn't really much going on, particularly in our state. ViewForce had closed down, they'd petered out by the early 2000s, so there was nothing really active from a really active group point of view. George Simpson was having some meetings down in Chelsea, dragging along some of the old ViewForce members, and that was my first introduction to sitting around with people discussing UFOs. At that meeting, I met another man called Andrew Arnold who was trying to get a UFO group up and running, which was Victorian UFO Action. And he and I hit it off pretty well straight away. He saw something in me. What that was, I don't know. But we got together and along with a couple of other people, we started to reconstruct a group again in our state. So ViewForce had been there for over 50 years. They'd had a huge backlog of cases they investigated. They did all the big cases from our state, and here we were in the new millennium trying to recreate what they had been doing for the previous 50 years with very little other than ourselves and a camera, popping out to locations, talking to witnesses, swatting flies in the sun, all that sort of stuff. We made videos. We created a website and Facebook pages, and then gradually we had more people start to join us, start to get interested, and it was a bit of a revolving door at the start. We had people coming through the group, deciding it's not for them for whatever reason, and you have this sort of turnover of people. But after a while, it started to stick, and we started to get some really good people coming along, and we were just pinching ourselves at the quality of the people that were coming to our meetings, and not just coming to the meetings, actually wanting to come back. So that was really good too. We had a couple of conferences that we did. That was a good start, and that's where the likes of Jim came along, and Lana popped up, and all the other guys here at the table popped up, and we're so glad they did. We're very grateful for their input. So for me, it was about getting out there and talking to the witnesses. I had a great passion for UFO cases. I believed the witnesses. I believed their stories. And we wanted to get out to the locations and preserve the history, the UFO history, and also at the same time offer to current people the opportunity to report UFOs as well. So the whole thing grew out of really just good old-fashioned keenness and a desire to do it. And I drove to Melbourne for month after month, 6-hour return trips, trying to get this group up and running.
So I was just going to ask you your location, basically to describe where your location is.
Yeah, well, if you look at a map of Australia and a map of Victoria, I'm up in the pointy end of the state, which is in the east. It is 3 hours from Melbourne. It's a wilderness area. Gippsland is a fantastic UFO location. The UFO history in Victoria is very rich. Every region of our state has quite an extensive UFO history. It is worth preserving so that we know what's happened in the past, so we can see what's happening in the future. Maybe we can make some connections between past and future and present. So it was a big job. It's a big job getting anything going. Whether it's a scout group or anything, a basketball club, whatever it is, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and particularly with a topic like UFOs, where there's not a lot of support for that in the community, really. It really is a niche type of an interest, which fortunately in this day and age is becoming a lot more widespread. And I'm not talking just the pop culture stuff. The pop culture stuff is out there and everybody loves all that and it's a lot of fun. But the research side of things is really what we really need to get going. We really need the research. We need the scientists to be involved. There's a whole host of the biologists. There's a whole host of people that really need to take it seriously. And since the Air Force lost interest back in the 60s, and they said, look, just go to the civilian clubs if you've got a UFO report. Go to ViewForce, go to UFO Research Queensland, New South Wales. Don't bother us. Go to those groups, but the groups don't have any support. They've got to really self-generate their own income, and there's only one way you can do that, and that's by hosting speakers. Maybe you can get some government grants if you're savvy enough with operating through that system and paperwork, but for UFO groups, it's kind of, I don't think we'd be at the top of the list for issuing funds. They'd probably give it to a pony club over us. So, and unfortunately, that's the way it is.
Right. And this next gentleman here recognized me in the hallway.
Yes, I did. Yes, a bit of a fan of your show. It's a good show. My name's Chris. I'm from Victoria, Australia as well. I also live in Gippsland, not far from Ben, in a place called Golden Beach. I've been probably taking the subject more serious in the past 5 years. Prior to that, I would watch the subject but not really investigate it too much or read much of the books. But I did have a sighting in '91 where I saw a disc. I thought I was crazy for about 6 years until I spoke to my mum, and she had a similar experience. So I guess that's where I sort of come at it.
So can you describe your sighting a little bit?
Yeah, it was. I suppose I would describe it as almost a tapered egg-shaped type disc. It was probably within a kilometre from where I was standing. It came up from behind some trees and just flew up through the clouds, and off it went. It probably lasted maybe 15 to 20 seconds, but it was enough to just be a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
And you?
Hi, I'm Joyce. Ever since I was a child, I always looked up at the stars and wondered, or thinking, oh, I wish I could go home. And then I would pinch myself and think, oh, what do you mean? You know, this is home. But when I was 15, I watched a documentary on the Roswell crash and was fascinated by it. There were a few whistleblowers, but back then their faces were blacked out and their voices were disguised, which is quite interesting because now, you know, it's not the case. They're quite visible. And then I read Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, around 15 years old as well, and was fascinated and quite scared. But I think from that book I really developed some empathy for people that have experiences such as that and don't know where to go, and people just seeing that they're crazy. And when I was about 25, I saw a craft in Perth, WA. It was round and it was luminous, and then it will dim and then it will glow again, and it was moving really fast, and then it would zigzag, disappear and reappear, and then move really fast again. And I had my boyfriend at the time saw it as well. And then I saw it another time, the same type of craft, about 10 years later in New Zealand on top of a mountain. Still, the same, round. It would dim and glow, dim and glow. And I work as a psychologist, so I'm really interested in the types of entities that people encounter, and there's been some consistent types. So I'm really interested in, what the culture is and the different types that people are talking about. And I think that there's enough people talking about it to move forward and really learn about them.
Interesting. Few words from you, Lana?
Do I have to?
Just
my interest started when I was a little girl. My brother was interested in space stuff, so I think I got it from him to some degree. I remember as a kid, my dad had Reader's Digest books, Into the Unknown, had pictures of aliens and UFO craft, and I just zoned into them all the time. I'd flick back and keep looking at them and keep looking at them, and all throughout my life I just wanted to see a UFO. Never saw anything up until recently. Never been abducted, never had anything weird happen, just always interested, and one thing led to another, and I ended up joining this group, and the rest is history. It's been mind-blowing ever since then.
Yeah, I really like the connections that you can make. I mean, it's so enriched my life in so many different ways. I never knew it was something that was available, or I didn't even think that there was any interest in the topic. I really had no clue. I would have never dreamed that there was going to be a conference of any type on this subject ever, and come to find out it was going on for many years. I just want to ask you a couple of different things. First of all, I may have asked you this, Ben, but I'm not sure. I thought I had heard of a sighting in Australia that was really unusual along a highway where people pulled over.
Knowles.
Does someone know that case?
Yes,
no.
yeah, that's the Mundrabilla case in Western Australia, which is there's a road that basically travels from Adelaide to Perth, and it's called it's the Nullarbor Plain, and it's flat, it's straight, it's desolate, there's nothing around. It really is a classic desert area. And on this particular night, the Knowles family were travelling from Perth across to Melbourne, and they were travelling across the Nullarbor Plain, and at a place near Mundrabilla, this object came out of the heavens and it landed on top of their car, and it basically attached itself to the car and it lifted the car off the road as they were driving along, and it filled the car with a sort of a smoke, and they were all disorientated, and it dropped the car and they all ran out of the car, and they were terrified. And apparently a truck driver also, who was driving on the same road, also saw it. That's the basics of the case. It got a huge amount of media coverage at the time, a huge amount. The media were all over it. They leaped all over this case of this family. And it was a classic example of UFO witnesses being treated rather poorly for the magnitude of the case. Like, it really was it was a very, very traumatic case for those involved, and the media at the time in the late 80s took it as a bit of a joke, and they treated the family pretty poorly. The family was more of a working class family as well, which perhaps they didn't present that brilliantly on TV, and they were really the media sort of turned into a bit of a circus around that time, and the witnesses became very they were very bitter about that, and they won't talk about it now, and they're very hard to contact. The mother's passed away, and there was about 4 boys that are scattered around Australia. I even think one of the sons has died too. So it really, UFO history, or UFOs certainly in Australia, they sit in the background for so long, and then periodically a case comes up that goes bang, and all of a sudden it's got a lot of attention. That was one, the Kelly Cahill incident in the early 90s. That was also another one that really captured the public's attention again for a while, and the media jumped onto that case as well. And then you go through these long periods where there's not much sort of happening. Well, these things are always happening, but these giant cases that jump out might happen once every decade, or even every 2 decades. And certainly in the modern era, we haven't really had a Mundrabilla case. We haven't had a Westall. We haven't had a Kelly Cahill encounter that's popped up anywhere in the country.
What would you? Any one of you can answer this, but what would you consider like the Roswell of Australia? Is there something that was really, an amazing?
Probably Australia's 2 best known and gaining recognition internationally. 2 cases very close to where we live in Melbourne. One is the Westall school incident, and one is the Frederick Valentich pilot incident.
Oh, yeah.
Now, both of those, as a group, we're very close to both of those cases. We have, as a team, arranged, in fact, only last year was the anniversary of the 40th anniversary of the Frederick Valentich. Now, just briefly, he was a pilot, 21-year-old, who went, it's pretty well known actually, but was flying out of our local airport, was going on a short flight over Bass Strait, followed the coastline for 100 miles or so, and then flying over water, reported back to the control tower asking if there was any aircraft in the area. The answer was no. Is there any military aircraft in the area? The answer was no. He was reporting that he was being followed by something that wasn't a plane. There was conversation for 6 or 7 minutes back between he and the control tower. He was saying, "It's following me, it's above me, it's gone, it's back again." One of his final comments was, "I can see it again, and it's not an aircraft." There was then that was followed by some static on the radio, and he was never seen again. Now, his mechanic is a member of our team. His fiancée at the time is someone who's very well known to us. We recently put together a conference, and we had the fellow who was in communication with him from air traffic, a gentleman by the name of Steve Roby. And Steve Roby said he believes it was he used the word UFO. So we put together a conference only pretty much a year ago around that. So that's one of the world's most important cases. And of course, we had the Westall case, which someone else can talk about, perhaps.
Yeah.
And that's, James, we've just come out of a presentation from James Fox. He went to Australia 2 years ago now, and he has a lot of content about the Westall case in his upcoming film. Right. And that's a very big story. A daylight sighting with 200 people, well documented, including a school teacher. So someone else, if you like, can talk about that one. But yeah.
That's Valentin. Is that how you say his name?
Fred Valentich.
Valentich.
Yes.
Can I ask, were you aware of that one, Martin?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I've seen, like a reenactment audio of what was happening. But I'm just wondering, does the original audio exist from that?
The answer is yes.
And is it available?
The answer is no.
Any idea what stops it from being available?
What I've been told is that because someone allegedly died or went missing in that incident, the investigation people don't release the details of the case. That's what I've been told.
And is that forever?
I don't know, Ben. Do you know about that? Probably is.
To my knowledge, yes, that is forever.
Yeah.
So at the time when Fred disappeared, the Department of Transport were extremely transparent. They released the entire transcript of Fred and Steve Roby's conversation to the public. It was printed in the newspapers the very next day, and you could read it. And they didn't edit that in any way, shape or form. They put down the entire conversation. So, and an investigation was done. Then, over the years, with government departments, records get moved, they get shipped, locations change, they destroy records. And if you approach the Department of Transport now and ask them for a copy of that particular tape, it just doesn't exist. You can't order that tape. You can't order that tape because it's not there. Well, you can't order that tape because it's not there, and also it's classified as not being released. The family was given a copy of Fred's voice. So they got a tape with one side of the conversation. That was everything that Fred said. So the family did get his final words and how that went down. And there's lots of reenactments that have been done. The reenactments are actually quite good. Sorry?
As far as the reenactments, he's like really, really stressful.
Yeah.
And do you think that's accurate?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. No, Fred was a pilot and he was working the problem. Fred and Steve were working that problem together, and they were working that problem in a rational and clear and coherent way right through to the absolute very end of the transmission. At no point in time is Fred in a panic. That's a misrepresentation that might come through in some of the actual recreations, because no one can really hear his voice to say how he actually was. But no, they were working that problem in a very real way. And if you watch on our YouTube channel on Vifoa TV, you can watch the anniversary day that we had, and Steve Roby really goes over that in a very, very thorough way, and he gives a really good breakdown of that event.
Was there at any point where there was any movement caused by the craft? Like, for instance, there's a coin helicopter case that happened here in the States where it actually was pulled, lifting the elevation of the helicopter. Did he mention anything? He
said one thing. He said my engine is coughing when it was in proximity to the craft, and he described the craft as orbiting above him. So, and it was having an effect on his engine, and that the engine started coughing. He did an adjustment, and him and Steve were working that issue through. At the end of the tape, perhaps interestingly, and maybe closer to what you're sort of talking about, is there's an unknown sound that comes on for about 17 seconds, and it sounds like a scraping sound, a rotating scraping sound. And there's been a lot of conjecture over the years as to what that scraping sound is. Is it simply him dropping the mic? Is it metal rubbing on metal? No one really knows. But his plane was reacting to the object being in the vicinity, and there was definitely some type of a sound as a result of that contact.
What do the skeptics say about that incident?
Well, that's one thing. The skeptics say he was flying upside down. That's the obvious one. And you can't fly Cessnas up down for much longer than about 20 seconds because they actually run out of fuel because the fuel's in the wings. They said he went into a graveyard spiral where he gradually and unknowingly just descends and basically ends up in the ocean. So they're the two main theories.
He's seeing a reflection of the moon in the water.
He's seeing a reflection of the moon in the water.
Was this night flying?
Yes, this was his night flying, dusk.
Actually, dusk.
Yeah.
Sorry, when we had our 40th anniversary event, we had it at the airport that he left from, and we had it. Our event spanned into the time that he left. We actually stopped. I think Steve Roby mentioned. He said, "Look up, everyone. This is the conditions that he had left the airport in. This is exactly the light." And it was just dusk. It was still quite light. It wasn't pitch black or dark or confusing. It was still a reasonable amount. Yeah.
There's also been hypotheses that he's committed suicide or that he's faked his own disappearance. But at the time he was engaged, he was sane, he was happy. He was a happy guy, apparently. We know people who knew him. We know his fiancée very well. So, none of us believe that that has any credibility, that's for sure. We don't know what happened. We have no opinion. But certainly, I for one, don't believe that was even remotely possible.
Yeah. I mean, whenever something tragic like that comes up, people try to piece together, and it's not always pretty.
It actually is one of the world's greatest aviation mysteries. It's certainly Australia's greatest aviation mystery that a pilot can interact with some unknown craft, literally just outside of Melbourne, metropolitan area, basically still within the control of the Tullamarine Airport, and disappear off the face of the earth. And you could say that, well, logically he ended up in the water. Well, they searched for 2 weeks and they didn't find any wreckage, they didn't find anything. They found an oil slick, but the oil slick was marine diesel. So there was literally no sign of that plane. And a Cessna on impact, there'd be floating pieces of a Cessna on the ocean. You'd have to say no problem at all. They'd find pieces of wing, they'd find life jackets, they'd find anything like that was in the plane. You would have thought quite easily. And they basically started searching for him pretty much straight away. So what happened to him, no one can say, but it certainly is one of the world's most compelling UFO cases.
Yeah, I mean, if he would have to so gracefully ditch.
Yeah.
Without it breaking apart. I mean, that would be pretty rare.
That'd be pretty rare. And we asked lots of questions about Fred's competence as a pilot to Steve Roby and also his girlfriend, Rhonda, who went flying with him at every opportunity and in fact was meant to be on that flight with him. But due to twists of fate, she didn't actually end up on the plane. And he was a competent pilot, and he knew what he was doing. Even though it was his first night flight, and you can always say pilot inexperience, and logically he must have ditched into the water. But the conversation's very strange. It's a very strange conversation to be having with a flight services officer when you're basically a pilot who's trying to create a career for yourself, and talking about UFOs doesn't help your career. In 1978, it wouldn't have been a good idea to be talking about UFOs.
Can I just add to that? There's no record of him actually mentioning the word UFO.
No, he doesn't.
In that transcript. He never mentioned the word UFO. He just asked about an object or a craft, but
yeah. He basically says, "Is there any known aircraft in the vicinity?" And they're talking about military, they're talking about civilian, and Steve Roby's going, "No, there's nothing. There's nothing up there with you. There's nothing up there that should be with you." But they couldn't see him on radar. He was not high enough to be on the radar. He was below that level, so they couldn't actually see him. They could only talk to him, so they couldn't get a visual of what was up there with him at that time.
Something?
Yeah.
The transcript, he loses sight of it several times, and he says it's moving around me. Then he says it's gone. Then he says it's on top of me. So it was quite, whatever it was doing, it was highly unusual. So.
All right. So just December 2017, the New York Times comes out with the article about Pentagon researching UFOs. It kind of changed everything here. The media started looking at it more seriously, the topic. There was, the ridicule factor went down. All of a sudden, there's a ton of more people listening to my shows and interested. What changed? Did anything change in Australia? Did you get this in the media? It was 126 news stories.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. The Australian news media jumped onto it as much as anyone else in the world did. Oh, yeah, for sure. And you had the morning shows and various programs doing UFO pieces. It becomes something they want to talk about again. And on Facebook, it's viral around the world. So I think it definitely has gained a lot of traction. Since coming out, and that's a good thing for all of us, I think, for all the work that we're doing, everyone here at the conference, all the researchers around the world, for the witnesses around the world. This is all steps in the right direction.
A lot of what we have here, I'm sure you've seen Ancient Aliens, or you know of it.
Yes.
Is there any aspect of Indigenous people that talked about, like, the Star Child and or anything like that? Any sightings that came down as lure to them that you're aware of?
Oh, absolutely. The Aboriginals, I think, have had a strong connection through the millennia with, let's call them sky people, for the sake of the exercise. When you go up to northern Australia, up in the Northern Territory, there are lots of cave paintings. And the Aborigines up there were a lot more. They weren't as nomadic as other areas. They could live in areas for longer periods of time with billabongs that are full of water and fish, plenty of fish. So they kind of did live in the one area. So they sort of did create a lot of record of what was happening in the last 20, 30, 40,000 years. And like with the American Indians of the Southwest United States, there's a lot of interesting paintings that are on these walls, ochre paintings, with different symbols and symbology. And even if you are looking at it from a 21st century perspective and you look at some of those images, it's hard not to see astronauts, it's hard not to see spaceships, it's hard not to see some type of entity depiction that they've put down into their record, into their onto the walls of their caves. So, but it's a whole other topic on its own. Yeah, sure, Julie.
Yeah, so there's the Aboriginal community. I don't know whether it's all of them, but at least some of them do say that they come from the Pleiades. That's part of their folklore, or their, the story that they pass down to their children from generations. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And there's stories of them landing on the ground and interacting with Aboriginals that are out there in the Northern Territory, Western Australia. There's various, but they're always vague reports. They're not well documented. They're almost urban legends in many ways. And really, someone needs to take the time and effort to go out to those communities and earn their trust and try and get these stories perhaps with a little bit more detail, if that's even possible. So, but at the end of the day, yeah, the UFO phenomenon has been around our country for for a very long time, and right from ancient millennia right through to now.
How does your government react to the topic?
Well, Jim probably could have a little bit to say on this too, but basically they've followed the American line pretty much through modern time. That's all I have to say. Jim can probably add a bit more.
Yeah, I kind of follow, of all the people in the group, I'm probably closest to the whole the cover-up and disclosure side of things. The short answer is they don't. There's been just radio silence at our end. Personally, I don't think they know a thing. If whatever your government knows, I don't think we're copied in. If I could rewind, though, to your question about the media coverage and stuff before, only a week before we came here, there's a TV show called The Project. And it's a news show with a comedy bent. And we couldn't believe it. They ran a story that started with, could there be something to this UFO thing after all? And they ran the Nimitz story. David Fravor, the whole thing. And, okay, there was a few jokes towards the end, but that's a big step forward. None of us were getting this stuff a year ago. And look what's been happening here. So there's definitely a shift in culture, I think. Yeah. There's always the disclaimers. They're not giving it good coverage, but we're definitely seeing a shift. But from the government, no, nothing. That anyone else seen anything that? No. Nothing at all. No.
Yeah, the government's very. Yeah, I think Jim's right. I think the Australian government knows anything at all, really. And any evidence from our cases, footage, that sort of stuff, it all goes straight to the
reports of military sightings, and there's an awful lot of them, and they're just very dry to read. Like these personnel noticed this object or this craft that was behaving unusually, and just a very dry record. But there is quite a volume of them. Obviously, not the volume that is had in the United States because of the comparison of population, but it is there, but it is not known by the general public. I think in my experience in talking to people about my interest, if somebody asks me, there's a certain age cut-off where people who are over a certain age are still smirking and ridiculing this, yet the younger generation are very much more accepting because they seem to be much more informed because they have grown up with the internet and they can source information. If they're curious about something, they'll look it up. Whereas I guess people above 50, 55, 60, there's still a proportion that's saying, oh, you don't believe in UFOs, do you? As though it's a belief. And my response is, I don't believe in anything. I'm an atheist. I don't see it as a religion or a spiritual pursuit. For me, I see it as a point of scientific interest that needs more study. So, and then when it is explained that the military all over the world are encountering, so trained observers are encountering these objects and these craft and sometimes entities, then it's quite sobering for the person who is ready to ridicule the topic.
Can I have a go? Chris over there actually has an Air Force background. I'm wondering if Chris has sensed any change in perception or...
No, not that I've noticed at the moment. I'm a contractor at the moment to the Air Force, so I'm not actually, an Air Force personnel, but even while I was in, I hadn't really seen anything like that, so I would highly doubt it.
The ridicule factor, is that changing? Are you seeing anything?
Yeah, well, I definitely don't talk about UFOs at work, that's for sure. Like, I don't. It's just one of those things.
What about recently when the U.S. Navy is saying that they're going to arrange reporting of UFO sightings? That must have made some type of...
I would think so, maybe at a higher level, but at the lower levels where I would operate, no, I haven't seen any of that, no. But I would hope so. I would definitely hope so. You'd want... If a pilot or Navy personnel to have a sighting, you'd want the appropriate way to report it.
I see. Right. Well, I think this is going to do it for sure. You guys seem to get along pretty well. Do you ever argue? Or?
Sometimes. No, we're pretty good. Yeah, sometimes, but...
Yeah.
We do. We get on really well.
Yeah, we've got a really good group of people
about each other, but
we all come from different backgrounds, completely different points of view on the topic. But the topic itself draws us together. We're all interested in different aspects of the topic, and of course we have healthy disagreements where I think this is the theory and this is my theory on what it is, and then one of us will disagree and we'll have a healthy discussion and we'll both learn, or each of us will learn from the other person's point of view. But that's the done thing in the scientific community, the mainstream scientific community too, where a scientist will put out a theory and someone else will come along and disprove it, and so it's no different. but yes, we do get on. We love each other.
Yeah, we do. That's right. We as I said, we do all have different perspectives on it, and sometimes we can flare up with vigorous and healthy discussion about that. But crucially, like on these road trips, when you've all got to be in cars on certain times and meet at certain locations and things like that, that puts us all under pressure too. And so far, the trip's been going really, really well, and I think it's going to be a great memory for all of us.
The synchronicity, we have a weird synchronicity that's going on. Well, we don't have to call each other. We just sort of like think about. Well, we have to meet, and then we end up meeting without even...
we all just kind of arrive from different directions. It
keeps happening over and over.
But can I add, after the conference, we're heading down to Socorro, New Mexico. We're doing a bit of work there. We're getting onto the debris field down at Roswell. A few other things. Yeah, we're doing a real UFO road trip.
Pretty exciting. Wow. Very good. Well, thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really glad you were willing to do this. And thank you all Thank every Australian that listens to the show for me, would you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just turn this off. That was great.
Yeah, good.
Take two.
Thank you.